class. His poems have appeared in Dappled Things, Ibbotson Street, Pensive, Soul Lit, and elsewhere. In the summer of 2019, his sonnet, Detox, was chosen as an award poem by the editors of Plainsongs. Thomas's first chapbook, Winter in Halifax, was published in October 2021 by Kelsey Books. And I will be putting the purchasing information into the chat, so I'll do that for Tom in a minute. But now we look forward to hearing you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Hilary. I'd like to thank you for hosting today. I'd like to thank the entire New England Poetry Club, especially Jennifer Markell, Wendy Drexler, and David Miller for extending the gracious invitation to read today. Mary, Hilary, Linda, I benefit always from your constant encouragement and luminous example. It's a distinct honor to be reading with Dorothy Derifield and Moira Linehan today, whose work I look forward to hearing today and to exploring more deeply in coming days. It's great to be a poet. So without further ado, let's get to the poems. I'm going to read the title poem of Winter in Halifax, and here it is. I'm just riding the Happiness Express with a suitcase full of tatterdemalion language. Defaulted loans be damned, I need a stiff drink and a maritime gal of brass-knuckled laughter. Dejection, scramez-vous, bad mood be gone. I'd rather be plastered in Halifax this winter than sober in Schenectady. Take me back to the dive bars, the scruffy pubs of yesteryear. The Happiness Express pulls into Halifax at 4:06 in the morning. Sleepless among stray walkers in the cold, a black lab is baying at the glacially setting moon. Nothing's open for business. No museum, no bakery, no bookstore, no internet cafe. But I'm as lighthearted as a florist in February to be in the Halifax of gin-soaked Valentines. I grew up as a communicant in the Roman Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church tends to honor the Virgin Mary with place names, titles that refer to places where she's reputed to have appeared. For example, Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Guadalupe. This poem is called Our Lady of Cambridge, as in Massachusetts. Virgin of Harvard Square, gendering grace, watch over Holyoke Center, the garage, chameleon tattoos, and the nose ring place. Pray for the pink-haired waif of mournful face and ink sleeves on both ghost-white arms. Take charge, mother of winter roses, blushing with grace, of Raven, Grendels, Pete's, and just in case, tend to hungry undergrads at the large palace of pizza near the nose ring place. Keep the yard safe and sage, make it your space. Send down, Maria, pardon from the stars, expand this city's heart. Lady of Grace, shelter the sleepers crouched in church doorways against the cold. Protect the crowds in bars, the punks in the pit, and at the nose ring place. Gather us all in your clement embrace. Hasten with healing for our wounds and scars. Bless Newbury Comics. Bless the nose ring place. Spare change, Madonna, prodigal of grace. A longer and somewhat romantic poem. The title comes from the Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 14, My dove in the cleft of the rock. Feed me with salmon cakes, refresh me with peppermint tea, offer me Glenmorangie as we listen to Says You on an old transistor radio. Let me walk you home on those cold nights when we've stayed out till the witching hour, talking Cole Porter and metaphysics. Let me help you move those big cardboard boxes to the recycle bin. Let me be the pair of eyes next to yours, looking up at Orion in a clear black January sky. Let me buy you clementines, walnuts, boxes of celestial seasonings. I would dance with you to tunes that I croon as we turn and sway. I would sing for your delight when I'm 64 and the wonder of you. I'd sing in Italian. Io che non vivo più di un'ora senza te. Let me walk with you the 12 blocks from Central Square to Congregation Eitz Chaim on Magazine Street, where services are Fridays at 7. Let me be your shield against startlement and shadow, against menace and misery, against all things dark and arctic. Let there be cider at the Kickstand Cafe, music at the Highland Avenue Armory. Let me hug and hold your slender form, made ample with winter sweaters. In Theodore Retke's collected poems, toward the very back, there are some uncollected, unpublished poems that were posthumously, released. And among them, there is a Rouse for Stevens, a funny little drinking song he wrote to honor the poet Wallace Stevens. And you can all find it in his collected works, and some of you may already know it. But in a similar style, in a similar comic, semi-bawdy vein, I wrote my Rouse for Retke, because I felt one good turn deserved another. So here, in honor of Theodore Retke, Rouse for Retke. Big Ted Retke, what's his game? He can bust the butterfly. He can snow the blushing rose, call Dame Ladybug by name. Count of creaturely delight, he can herrick with the best. Married to the wormy earth, he's the swain of gladdest girth. When he dances, bedlam sings, lyric fingers pluck their strings, joyful bodies rub and budge to his red blood psalms of love. Watch him garland up a page. He's no mushroom, he's a sage. He can coax the daffodil with a single syllable. Theodore, my robust rhymer, no one bards a garden finer. You're the heir and princely son of Clare, Carew, and Campion. Thank you, David. I'm noticing that I'm a little ahead of time, so I will do possibly another tribute to a poet. This one is called Reading Hart Crane. A rough-tongued winter, shell trash and gull clutter along the dirty curve of Revere Beach. The Atlantic churns its mass of liquid slate with cold relentlessness. A 16-year-old poet carries a paperback at least twice his age, a yellowing Oscar Williams anthology. He reads the words of the self-drowned psalmist of tropic voyages, Marlovian hymnographer of azure deeps and steeps. The sea claimed you, Hart Crane, as you claimed the sea, scribe of brined bones, of doom and spume. The merciless oceans bent foam and wave, swallowing your song. I think two more. This is another one of my romantic pieces, I guess, but it's well, hopefully not maudlin. I wrote about someone I knew back when, and I wrote reams and reams of just maudlin verse. And it was, oddly enough, Stephen Fry, the British actor, who in his one of his novels put together this marvelous collage of praises in honor of someone he was smitten with. And I sort of imitated Stephen Fry a bit here. This is called She. She was Carmen Jones and Killing Me Softly, the tents of Kedar and the curtains of Salma. She was Charlie Parker in Lady Day, the Nobel Prize, the Impossible Dream, Michelangelo in the month of May. She was signed, sealed, delivered, blinded by the light, betcha by golly wow. She was Hammer and Hank, Earth, Wind and Fire, bumblebees, baptism and the wine of astonishment. She ruled him like Britannia. She laid him waste like Carthage. Vesuvius and Venus, Fra Lippo Lippi and the 3 degrees, sugar pie, honey bunch, the summer of love, she was all that. She was Beatrice and Brooklyn, Easter and ecstasy, happiness and apple blossoms. She was Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, Pavarotti and Purple Rain, an ode to joy and a song of praise. She was All Hail the Queen. She was Opposites Attract. She was Black by popular demand. She was Coffee and the Cocteau Twins, Death Be Not Proud and Do the Right Thing, What's Going On and Fight the Power, the joyful Kilmarnock Blues. She was the Fall of the Wall, the Exultet, the Magnificat, a velvet revolution in living color. She was the second Martini and the third glorious mystery. She was Ella singing Cole Porter. She was under his skin, but good. And lastly, a poem I wrote sort of as a year poem. I had this idea that I would write down various years. I think James Merrill has days of 1964 and days of 1965. I had, my years were 70s and 80s largely. And the earliest year I could go back to with some feasibility was 1972. And I thought of calling this poem 1972. But it describes chasing the waves, something my dad and I used to do on the sands of Revere Beach. I would run after the water as it receded. Then of course I'd have to run back so I wouldn't get splashed. This poem has come to serve as a kind of eulogy for my dad, who died 4 years ago in March. So to close, Chasing the Waves. With Dad, Revere Beach, 1972. My 3-year-old legs would scurry to pursue the beast of the Atlantic in retreat. Of course, its watery paws would soon rush back to maul the shore. I'd run from their attack as quickly as I could on toddler feet. Delighted, Dad would look on and would shout encouragement and warning. Hey, watch out, they're gonna get ya. I would shriek and laugh. I'm older now than Dad was then. No son to teach this excellent art of having fun, of chasing waves for an hour or a half. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being here. Peace and light, everyone. Have a great day, and looking forward to hearing the other readers. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. It's a joy to hear you read your poems. So next we will hear from Dorothy Derifield. Sorry. Dorothy is the co-director of the literary reading series Chapter and Verse in Jamaica Plain, and is a member of the committee that directs the Rozzie Reads poetry series in Roslindale. She is the author of the book 0 Plus Time, published by Cherry Grove in 2020, and a chapbook, The River and the Lakes. She won an editor's award from Plainsongs and has appeared in the Radcliffe Quarterly. She is a member of the Jamaica Pond Poets and lives in Roslindale. And I will put the purchase information in the chat for her book. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you so much. Tom, you're a hard act to follow. What a wonderful reading. I want to thank the New England Poetry Club and especially my dear friend, Jennifer Markell. Hi, Jennifer. I'm going to begin with a little tribute to our present season. It's called January. I have spent 3 days on hold with the Synod of Ordinary Time. Your call is very important to us. I have read every newspaper in every language, even those of distrust and dissolving manifestos, especially those. Time slows as we approach the speed of light. Einstein didn't mention extreme cold, yet we prove it again and again. Theories of countless dimensions, every unending ball of yarn. The tape sticks at important or call or us. I love the little mattress of snow on the porch railing, the footprints of birds, and the ruffled spots where they tried to make angels. The title of my book is 0 + Time, and this is the title poem. The old performers like to end with a single spotlight. Some let it fade. Others simply stepped out. No one seemed perturbed by the obvious. Life or death, black or white. But time has different shades of darkness, each with its own degree of cold. A memory floats through the mind the way clouds pass over the sun, with a slight chill, as if a little piece of winter had detached from the sky. The sound of an iron lung late at night in the half-lit ward, the shush squeak of the nurse's shoes in the corridor. In spring, a sudden glimpse of green across the parking lot. The day my body moved. The day it didn't. Luck. The sequined woman hands the croupier a $100 bill. Her eyes glance the way beads slide down the abacus toward me, perched on the stool in my party dress. Smarter to be lucky, sings the wheel, and her fingers don't hesitate over the numbers. I am thinking of walking the halls of the hospital long ago, with the long row of artificial lungs, each with its head on a rubber platter. The canisters breathe like the sand, the sea reaching for the land. And I am walking through the waves, walking. The woman sparkles as I tip the croupier, glad to see me moving my unlucky bones from her table. My husband put his 20 into the slots and got back 26. With his luck in our pockets, we walked the deck, ships sailing into the heart of the tropics. I am thinking it is best not to know what the left hand keeps while the right hand gives. The sequined woman hands the croupier a $100 bill. We used to have a pandemic in this country called polio, and it happened every summer. And during one of those years, when I was 10, it got me. But I was very lucky. I can walk. This is a poem, I am reminded of it often because of the situation, of course, that we are in now. Nobody resented having to take a vaccine back in those days because we could all see. This poem is for my mother, and it references memories from a time almost medieval now that we used to call the 40s, called ceremony, elegance. The night is damp. Water trickles steadily from the large locust trees. Each street light wears a little mask of fog. In the kiosk, I see a shiny magazine my mother used to love. I take it home, spread it over my knees, the tray richeur of her hands. Her going out. She lifts it high and sets it down slowly on her dark pin-curled hair. The gray felt hat with its tiny veil, an asymmetrical swirl of colored beads. She presses her lips, inspecting the face she wears over her face, and me behind her in the mirror, watching her crimson mouth. So late, it says, almost 8 o'clock. And her coming in. Everything she wears is a vestment. Its ritual beauty of cut and line remains on the hanger with the scent of talcum, cigarettes, and bridge club, while the hands move in patterns of daily wear, choosing and discarding amid the strict observance of season. The short white gloves of summer, the velvet shadows of winter. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. My mother was an excellent seamstress, and she owned fabric stores, and she was a small town fashionista. This was a hunting culture. And I used to go out with my father sometimes when he wouldn't, not very, seriously, but went out to hunt some pheasants. This is called hunting season. This is about the Saturday afternoons with my father in the green Chevrolet, Minnesota football on the radio, shotguns in the trunk. Not about the pint bottle under the seat, the blood on the breast, the pellet in the flesh, or the woman alone in the rundown farmhouse. Here is the sun on the stubble fields, that old blonde color going to gray, blending into the gravel road and the dust behind us. That was the poem that Plainsongs liked, and you could see why. Nebraska, yes, Minnesota, a lot in common. I came out here to go to college, and I was here in the 60s, and yes, I actually do remember some of it. All I remember, there was never too much. When we woke in places we didn't remember, we put on the smell of last night and went to work. We were light, strong, and elegant, using, losing in the immortality of now, the smooth, exquisite darkness. Auteurs and faded ingenues, cue the soundtrack. I wore a white suit, appearing on your steps at dawn. You held a salon in the motorcycle shop. In a decaying mansion, photos of our lives flashed in time to music. I wore a white suit. You disappeared, leaving disconnected parts of your body in the mountains of a foreign land. Now our night rocks in a lifeboat. Fog-bound survivors remembering the ship, lights sliding slowly into the sea like notes, descending slowly to the bottom of the scale. Yes, there were a lot of drugs in the 60s, just as there were a lot of drugs in the 50s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and now. Freight train going so fast. My father worked for the railroad. He loved the fast freights. Why did Minsky starve himself to death in the house of frozen glass? And why did Olga give up the violin after all those painful years at Juilliard? When I was little, my father liked to watch the fast freights run past the station. Full speed, no stops. Small towns blur, cars just melt together. Minsky, in a cold, dark room, I passed through to other scenes of narcotic destruction. Olga knew it was food that made them grow louder. The needles break, whisper, what? I didn't know. I was moving too fast. The schedule came in early, 80 cars, 10 o'clock, broken pint bottles straight through to Fargo. And this is my last tribute to that era. Candyland. In the shining rain, in the garden of night's delight, poppies bloom between each room of your heart's beat. Listen, wires hum with compassion. Listen to the rain, glistening with memory. Little vials of love and money. And sleep will come with money, and sleep will come. In the end, it will be your perfume and your friend, the room of your heart's delight, the only flower you crave. You may have noticed that it is always an adventure when you're riding on the MBTA in Boston. I particularly like buses because buses, often if they're crowded, they give you more chance for your imagination to roam. People don't all sit like zombies looking at their phones. So this is called Late Afternoon Bus with Dolls. Excuse me a minute. The girl with the long braid and round cheeks looks with envy at the art school student, shaved head except for the black perfect bun in the center of her skull. This braided girl, who was given only dolls with soft, squishy bodies and ethnic faces, who knows all about the other one, how her dolls slide off their shelves at night in their leather skirts, to slink the streets, picked up by strangers in tiny doll cars, crawling home at dawn with wads of cash in their tiny doll fingers. Beneath them, the invisible woman sits hunched into her long life, her collection of dolls in their authentic native dress, safely at home in the china closet where her mother put them 70 years ago to keep them nice. But she does think the art student reminds her of someone, while the girl with the braid imagines the further adventures of the streetwalker dolls and their tiny dolls. On a really clear night, if you're very, very lucky in Boston, and it happens to be in the dark part of the sky, every once in a while, the space station will go over. Now, years ago, Russia used to have a space station called Mir, which in Russian means both peace and world. And one night, I heard on the news that Mir was going to be passing over Boston, and all the darkness aligned just right, and I was able to see it pass over. And for some reason, it thrilled me to see it. It's called Mir over Boston. Homesteading the fields of zero, tubes, tools, and hair wave and float over the melting ice, electric storm, New England, New York, New Jersey, colonized by light. Good night, over the cars and bars, the steeples with their Christmas stars. We are between men and angels, layers of twilight, slow time waves and floats, and so we are. Good night, says the bishop to his painted ceiling and to the hermits of Mars. His dreams roll over red dust on tinker toy wheels. Hearing something, they start. Hearing nothing, stop. The bishop spreads his fan to the sun. Nothing is more uncertain than the sun, says Mir to the bishop, floating over his steeple. Coding for soul, says Mir. Coding, says NASA. Rest, say rest. Say hermits, we do not receive communion. And stay in the Christmas season, which we have just left for a moment. You know, there is an old legend about the animals on Christmas Eve. The animals talk among themselves. It is Christmas Eve, and the ox has a lot to say. These souls we have contain our suffering, feed bags of our immortality. Be glad you are large, says the donkey. Suffering is also in the body. But not only, they murmur, the sheep and the goats together. The long eyelashes of the camel fold down. He has come a long way over a desert, growing ever longer. He knows he has been here before. What he has been brought before. Deep under the sky, deep under the hay, the snake lies curled asleep. In spring, she will slip away unnoticed. She has said what she has to say about the messenger and the choices that were made. Every time the weather gets bad, my husband likes to remind me about how many days it will be until crocuses. And this always makes us feel better. So I'm going to end with a poem called Vernal Equinox. Just yesterday, the clear air shattered under her voice, but today it softened, folding itself around her words. Cries became songs. Even the wind had changed his tune. She saw this happening as she saw the task of the hands is to make small movements, dividing then from then. In that smell of fertility and decay, the task of her hands is to drop seeds, knowing some will die, not knowing which ones. I was in my 40s when I wrote that poem, and it keeps changing. Every decade, it changes. I want to thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to hearing Moira.
Thank you, Dorothy, for that beautiful, beautiful reading and for the wonderful reminder of spring and of how the decades keep passing.
It will come.
Yeah. Okay, so we will hear now from Moira Linehan. Moira Linehan is the author of 4 collections of poetry. Her first 2, If No Moon and Incarnate Grace, were published by Southern Illinois University Press. In 2020, Slant Books brought out Toward, and Dos Madres Press published And Company. Moira lives in Reading, Massachusetts, and I will put the purchase information in the chat. Welcome, Moira.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank all of you for being here this afternoon. Thank you, Jennifer, for all you did to get me here. And to the other officers of the New England Poetry Club, I very much appreciate this opportunity to read from my collection And Company. And that's a biography of sorts about my grandmother, my mother's mother, whom I did not know. She was a dressmaker, a dress designer, a seamstress in Paris at the end of the 1800s, the early 1900s, before moving to Boston. And I use French and American Impressionist paintings in order to try and imagine the world in which she lived and worked, to imagine what life was like for her. And as you know, when you try to connect, when you try to get close to something, you are very aware of distance. And so I'm going to take poems that touch upon the theme of distance for my reading this afternoon. And I'm going to begin with the preface poem, How Much Distance? And that has an epigraph from Alex Kingsbury's little article, 1 millimeter. Dressmakers, either because they self-selected into a profession that requires excellent 3D perception, or because the job itself trains the brain to have better stereoscopic sight, were 80% more accurate than others at estimating how much distance stood between themselves and distant objects. And what about my art and all its allowances? Designs for the empty, here, there, left, right, and in between, white space, blank space, along with the dropped, the missing letter, contractions, elisions, ellipses, the half said, the unsaid, and yet the implications perfectly clear. Or if not dropped, then all that's left hanging, enjambed, compressed, even broken, line breaks, fragments, incomplete sentences. My art designed for distance, then wanting to repeat those distances until they're devotions. Beat going on in sounds, phrases, lines, resounding echoes, shadows, palimpsest, ghosts. Art I chose when my mother died suddenly. 50 years, this art, training my brain, teaching my heart, leading me on and on, reaching for, longing for, following Miss Bishop's imperative, though it may look like, write it, like, even she repeating that possible link, connection in her poem of strictly repeated lines, like art designed to bring its artist again and again to the end of the line, endings that are not. And so I want my reader with me to recognize Elizabeth Bishop, the poet who taught me a lot about craft, to remember that this is a crafted thing, the work of imagination. And my first task was to get my grandmother from the town where she was born into Paris. She was born in Angers, about 165 miles west, southwest of Paris. And so this is what I do to get her there. If it's just a few dates I have of her life, and most of them only the year, how do I tell my grandmother's story except by invention? Nearly every line there for the creating. Before I set her on that train to Paris, though, I'll picture her poring over ads in Le Figaro, the new fashion plates in La Mode Illustrée, elegant women in yards of cascading dresses, my grandmother finding fabrics, muslin at first, while she's learning to copy them, then linen, tulle, satin, and velvet, to gather, pleat, tuck, drape, decorate with ribbons and buttons, not just dreaming her future as dressmaker in Paris, designing it. So this portrait of my grandmother, sketching an evening dress, needing layers of underskirts, dress she will turn out in black silk from Lyon. Her daughter, my mother, will grow up watching, as I'll watch my mother sew her own suits and dresses, my skirts. My mother, a knitter and designer for Bernat yarns, a weaver, a painter of still lifes and portraits. So this portrait of my grandmother as she boards that train in Angers. Already she is Parisienne in a pearl gray dress with its high-necked bodice, boned in seams, skirt that just sweeps the ground. I have her leave in 1894. My grandmother's 18, and I want her settled before Bert Morisot's sudden death. That way, I can insist she find the Durand Ruel galleries, attend the retrospective of Morisot's work, all those paintings of women, and her last late model, her only child, Julie. Yet once at the exhibit, she'll turn from me, use an upright parasol to balance herself as she leans back, looks up at painting after painting of a child more loved than all the Louvre's art. As I hear my ever-present mother tell me, it was really my grandmother who raised me. So where did I get that image of my grandmother leaning back on a parasol to look up at painting after painting on a wall? Well, I started to become influenced by the paintings that I was looking at. And I saw this, the next piece that I saw was titled The Fitting by Mary Cassatt. It's something that was in storage that I got to see while I had a 2-week residency in Brooklyn in the summer of 2015. And I'm very grateful to the director of that residency that I had, Margot Farrington, for the 2 weeks, for the wonderful access I had to be able to go back and back to New York City's museums. I'm just going to read the last section of the poem, The Fitting by Mary Cassatt, to give you that image. The spring of 1890, on exhibit for the first time, French collectors' Japanese prints. Degas invites Cassatt to attend, then to try dry point and aqua tint. Degas' influence, critics will write. But what about his 2 prints, 5 drawings, half dozen pastels, 2 paintings, all of her in the same pose at the Louvre, back to the viewer, leaning on her upright parasol, looking up at painting after painting. And so it's the 2 women artists that I've introduced you to so far, whom I'm going to focus on in many poems in this collection. Mary Cassatt from Philadelphia, she became an expat and painted among the Impressionists in Paris, along with Berthe Morisot, a French woman. And this next painting that I'm going to talk about, Young Woman Knitting, is by Berthe Morisot. How straight her back, not touching the straight back of her chair set right in the middle of a garden's wide pathway, an enclosed garden. The only way to enter is through the home. This, as far outside the home, this knitter can go, alone. Her proper companion's chair opposite, empty. For Berthe Morisot has no time to sit, be a companion. She has only this afternoon, its light, its lush summer greens. This too, as far as she can go. Her sister, now married, now mother, no longer free to be her traveling companion painter of countryside, seaside scenes. Morisot, now enclosed inside this garden before a young woman knitting, where I am, unable to tell if she's on a knit or purl row, for when I get close, there is no knitting, only thick brushstrokes. Morisot, who knew the proper distance between a sitter's back and her chairs, moving me back, still farther, showing me my place in this garden, to stand where she stood, see as she saw from a distance. And I'm going to now move you later in the connection to a poem titled At Customs in Boston. My grandparents have emigrated from Paris. My grandfather, a tailor, Jules Washer. My grandmother, his wife, seamstress, dressmaker. They've set up shop in Boston, and the name of that shop is his name, Jules Washer and Company. And Company being the title of this collection. And again, my effort to try and find out who is that and Company, who is that woman at Customs in Boston. And in this poem, you'll see how chance is such a historical point in my family and the man's family that my mother would marry at Customs in Boston. My tiny grandmother buying dresses and gowns at the shows in Paris in the years before and after the First World War, then wearing them all beneath a long flowing skirt. Let's say one with green and black stripes, her jacket, forest green wool, stiff collar with black braid trim, down the gangway and through the port of Boston, holding her shoulders back, her eyes straight ahead, noticing no one. That off-putting carriage of one's body the French know how to design. Gowns and dresses she'll take apart, copy and moire and tulle, velvet and royal. Year after year, my grandmother passing through customs and paying no duty. Marie Louise Antoinette Washer, initialed in gold on luggage her maid had packed. Porters were carrying hat boxes, suitcases, trunks, all with exotic stickers of bridges, cathedrals, towers, canals. Mine as a child, carrying cases for dressing up, for dreams. In 1911, she gave up her country, but not its language, her entree to fashion a grand entrance, opening night at Symphony, Mrs. Jack Gardner's annual ball. In memory, my mother sits with elegant posture on my bed, telling me this story. My mother who'd left all that for a man who could never dress her as she was accustomed. My father, an artist, his father, father of 10 and clerk at customs in Boston. And I'm going to close with a poem that is based on 2 paintings that I saw at the National Gallery in DC. It's titled Addressing the History. And I'm looking at one painting by Bert Morisot called The Mother and Sister of the Artist, and one painting by Mary Cassatt, Woman with a Fan. And this poem opens in a condo that I had rented there. This room, with its view of construction cranes and hollow buildings on the rise in DC above dust and debris, blocked off sidewalks, and the grand grind of dump trucks starting up when the light goes green and 4 lanes of traffic must merge to 3. I'm just 3 metro stops to the museum where I'll find the women Morisot and Cassatt painted in rooms of their own. Outside the room Morisot and Cassatt painted, Paris was one grand construction site, the slums along the Seine being razed, the destitute pushed back to the city's new far edges, the empty space becoming sun-filled parks and promenades as city life went on fine display. While inside rooms of their own, women preserved life as they'd always known it, private, confined. Mirrors repeat those private, confined lives. Here, Morisot's sister back home for her confinement, as they would have said, her loose, pale yellow robe slightly belling around her swelling belly, reflected, though just barely, in the mirror she waits beneath. Cassatt's mirror, 10 years after this Morisot, distinctly shows the back of her young woman's head and shoulders, while in her hands, a large gold fan open wide obscures her waistline, bust line. Taking measure of the waistlines, bust lines of the women who came to her, not stopping there though, taking note of those she passed on pathways in the Bois de Boulogne, the Boston Gardens. My grandmother endlessly undressing women to understand the construction of their clothes, how bones and stays, darts and tucks best display each one. I should have known if I got too close, she'd undress me. I'd never thought about getting too close. After all, my plan had been just to look at paintings, women in dresses she could have fashioned, so I could piece together a grandmother I'd barely known. I found her life a story of assemblage, watched how she could never stop taking a woman's measure as she steps forward to take mine now. So naturally have we switched places? I wonder who's been the subject all along. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moira, for that beautiful, richly layered reading.
Thank you, Hilary.
So we now have a few minutes. We can have time for questions or comments. And, you know, people can, if you have questions for the poets, you could put those into the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself if there's something you want to say to any of the poets or to the rest of us. And don't be shy.
Maura, how did you find all this information about your grandmother?
Well, it's a lot of it, as I want people to understand, is my imagination. Now, some of it is built upon research, however, and I began, the first thing that I actually did was to go to a woman, a curator at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. I explained what my project was, and I asked if she would help me prepare a bibliography. From there, I also went to a professor at LaSalle College, Jill Carey, who was in the audience today, and I asked her, what should I be reading in order to work on this project? And so I got help. And then once you start opening these books, they have their own bibliographies. And so that then triggered further reading. And I tried to go to some lectures at the Museum of Fine Arts, this because I began this project in 2015. Happen chance was there were some lectures on Mary Cassatt. So I just, I went from reading to lectures to looking.
Nice, beautiful work.
Thank you.
I was wondering if I could ask each of the poets just to say something about, I'm thinking about the experience of reading and how that maybe affects your writing ongoing. So I don't mean just this particular reading, but I mean the experience of sharing your work for an audience in this way. And how does that, or does that affect your writing process?
We can go in the order in which we read. How's that, Hilary?
Yes, great. So Tom, please, if you have anything to say about that, and maybe you don't, but just something I'm thinking about.
Well, at the beginning, I was going to say that it's marvelous being a poet because we're readers first. We energize and inspire each other through the work, and as we read for an audience, there's no fooling around when you read for an audience. You will find a flaw in a poem if there is a flaw in a poem when you're reading for an audience. And so, I'm always eager to put forward work that I think has been settled. The French poet Paul Valéry says a poem's never finished, it's only abandoned. And I've already marked up my copy of my book with potential revisions and whatnot. So yes. I just want to say, maybe not answering the question, but it's a joy to read for an audience. It so much of writing is spent alone at the laptop or wherever you write, with a notebook, whatever. And that's the marvel of the New England Poetry Club with their workshops and with live or virtual live readings. You get it out there. It's communication. We spread this happy contagion of our art, and good things happen, I like to think.
Well, I've never really thought about this subject before, but it's very interesting, and it brings some thoughts to mind. With referencing what Tom said, it reminds me of Elizabeth Bishop's elegy, or her wonderful elegy for Robert Lowell, in which she said, "Now you finally have to stop revising your poems." So I think that even though it may not be totally conscious, I think that the response that you feel, even if you don't hear it from the audience, tells you a lot about your poetry. It tells you about what works for a lot of people, what only works for some people, and what kind of emotional resonance your poetry sets up with an audience. And I think unconsciously, certainly in my case, unconsciously, I think I do so much unconsciously, I think, that it then has an influence on the way that I do write, or perhaps the things I emphasize more going forward. But thank you for the question. It's very interesting, and I hadn't thought of it before.
Okay, in order to prepare for this reading, I had to go back and read my collection because I'm going to be doing another reading, and I was given the instruction that it cannot, what I'm doing in this next reading, it cannot be a repeat of something I've done already. So I had to go back and look at my work and came to it with a new lens of this, you know, somewhat of a surprise. How many poems talk about distance? And I'm looking at what I'm feeling as I'm making these poems about my grandmother, that I am not really getting at, you know, who she was as an individual. I can see her as a worker, but I'm still not really sure I ever connected with her as a grandmother. But, you know, I'm thinking now, you know, what other poems about distance can I start to write, you know, for where I am now after having completed something where I was trying to make a connection. So it's the dissonance that's given me a trigger now to turn to. So thank you.
Thank you for those responses. It was wonderful. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Jonathan?
Yeah, I had a question for Dorothy. She talked about revisiting poems from previous decades and rewriting them, you know, bringing them fresh. But I wonder, I mean, are there poems that you look at that you say, that was really good and that really speaks to me as I was in my 30s, but I'm also going to rewrite it to be my, you know, have two versions of it? How do you resolve that for one your 60s or your 50s? And
I don't. The Vernal Equinox poem that I read last is exactly the way it was when I first wrote it. It's just the meaning changes for me to some degree over time. I don't find that it becomes of its time. It always stays with me in whatever time that I'm in. However, there are poems, since I, shall we say, a little bit older, there are poems that that I recognize that I wrote way back in my 20s and my 30s, and I don't connect with them. If I find in there an interesting thought or an interesting image, I will try to write it down in this little list that I keep of things that I want to have to remember. But mostly I don't try to take those poems and rewrite them. I find that to be a futile exercise for me.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that little bit of conversation, which if we were all in person, we could be mingling around and doing that, but it's nice to have a bit. So we're now going to turn to our open mic, and I will pass that to Linda Conte, who will run the open mic.
Thanks, Hilary. I just put the list of readers in the chat, and there are actually only 10. I had told you 11, but I had one doubled. So everyone should pay attention to when they are coming up to read and be ready to read, please. And also make sure your poem is no longer than 1 page, because we have a full slate of 10 readers. And we're going to start with Phil Dwyer. Ready, Phil?
Yeah, well, yeah, I might stretch a little past the page, but I'm on the spot. I don't have time to select a different one, so I'm going to go with what I could have called, but just couldn't make myself do it, the 7 steps of instinctive archery. So instead I wrote 7 septets of 7-syllable lines, and it's called Aiming via Not Aiming. Alive on the earth I stand, centered between left and right, feet spread shoulder width apart. Being right-handed, I turn my left foot out to open up my chest space to the full range of all in front of me. While sensing the world, I reach for the nocked receiving end of an arrow. Keying on the unique colored feather, I align the shaft centered on the bowstring for balanced flight, all the while remaining watchful of the landscape, both inner and outer, always mindful to point sharpened heads in safe, grounded directions. One hand holds the loaded bow, the other grips the taut string nestled in its fingertips. Ahead and behind, stretch all around as I pull backward in parallel with a push forward. My concentration moves towards form. I am stands centered in an archetype, the poised archer with long, drawn out arms, tensioned tight like springs, fulcrumed on an upright spine, stretched between earth and blue sky. Mine strives for the center of self, of place, of destiny, unites multiplicity and anchors in paradox. Yearning for optimum thrust into the heart of this world, I spread wide open to be penetrated while stilling my focus on its core, peace, and relax. Release results when strains accepted. The shaft bends with the shock, flies free and straight if I hold true and still, rooted in earth like a tree. The skull of my bull's eye is pierced. I reach for another.
Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Next, please, Michael Ball. Michael?
Sorry, I was waiting for the microphone to appear to unmute. All right. This is a nostalgic and romantic one, but then I'm an old man. That is what comes with old men. Yesterways. I almost passed many sketches on this or that wall. Just now, push pinned in every room, portraits on wide off-white sheets appear. I hold no velvet bag filled with lovers that I have pushed away or who have quit me. You and I cannot claim failed marriage. Then we might be done forever. What is love's expiry date? It's best if used by date. The shattered bond does not dim nor erase what was. We were kind to us. Thus our long ago joys ever remain in Hawking space-time, where and when what was still is. Am I inconstant and unchaste if I notice portraits of others as well as yours? Will not be one, you remain one. Your face and others present to me. I sigh for anyone who does not see sketches. Of course we had our moments, nights surely, morning frolics too, and cafe afternoons with sweet, then bitter, G&Ts over tiny white tables right on 7th Avenue, while number 20 buses and peds passed. We shared anticipation, the soon of mind, word, and hand. If you wonder, do I keep feelings for you? Do I ever think well of us? Know the yeses. The ideal of us lives and loves. Our 1,000 feats, our crumpled book of us. Ever you, ever us. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Is Ralph Culver ready?
I am. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, New England Poetry Club. What a wonderful reading. I want to wish everyone a happy new year from South Burlington, Vermont. And the poem I'm going to read is an occasional poem about the new year. It's from my new book, which is from Mad Hat Press, called A Passable Man. The poem's called First Night, Perkins Pier. Perkins Pier is an actual place on the waterfront in Burlington, Vermont, on Lake Champlain. And the poem's also an acrostic. The first letter of each line, reading down in the poem, spells out Happy New Year. First night, Perkins Pier. Here a woman draws a white coat close against the cold. The sky presents its chalice. Please dissolve in smoke at the lips of young children refusing to come in. Nothing will change. Each day plays the songs of water, of bread, of dying. Yet the winter lasts only a moment. Edging the lake ice, a girl tests her new skates, ringing a silver bell, eating a coin of chocolate. Thank you.
Lovely, Ralph. Thank you. Let's see. Carla Schwartz, are you ready?
I think I am. Okay.
All right.
Thank you for a lovely reading today. This poem is called Winter Solstice. It's December. Waning light shines through the window. Each day, another minute of daylight swallowed. This year, the shortest day is not the coldest day. The solstice occurs at a time on the clock, 10:30 a.m. this year. Yesterday, the air was so cold my fingers burned. Burning with cold, like burning with passion, only super cold. I felt the burn out on my ride. I had to shake my fingers to stem the pain. December is ending, winter beginning. Now we can count the days forward to lengthening light. Each day grabs another minute of life. Each day grabs another minute of light for itself. This year, I count backwards through the shortening too. Yesterday, my dead mother turned 90. My father didn't live to notice. The week before, my live father turned dead. 4 days prior, death inhabited his live skeleton. For days prior, his live skeleton labored for breath. Breaths whistled through his stiffening lungs, his uvula punched by each intake. In, out, a snake rattle, a cat purr. 3 weeks before, my father sat up in his hospice bed, a new arrival. He looked like a plump squirrel. A menu in one hand, he eyed the meal before him. Ghosts visited my father in his dreams, horrible stories he couldn't repeat. In one dream, he had to replace Placido Domingo. In another, a famous chemistry prof went postal. It was December. The waning light shined through the window. Each day, less and less food for my father. Each day, another minute of daylight swallowed. And that's it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Carla. Susanna Kittredge.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, everybody. This has been a great reading so far. Sorry, that's my cat in the background. I'm going to read from my book, The Future Has a Reputation. This is an older poem called The Migratory Inconvenient. Sorry, I can sit at a reading for the whole thing and the cat ignores me, and then as soon as I start talking, she jumps into my lap. Okay, Migratory Inconvenient. My dear revisionist, The leaves are falling here without fanfare, air a little crisp. In July, a fledgling band-tailed pigeon was found knocking down trees, or rather, road crews were knocking down trees when they stumbled over the Federal Migratory Bird Act. The large, chunky dove, technically a partial migrant, loves its well-worn paths up and down the coast. Yours are more erratic. Fall has come, the felling can resume, and you have managed to knock me flat on my back once again. In your dove gray sweater with a stripe around your middle, I'll call you my own Columba fasciata. You are migratory, inconvenient, rewriting your motives over and over, leaving half-cut branches to dangle between California seasons, yellow, green, and gold.
Thank you, Susanna. Next we have Sarah Backer.
Hi, I'm going to read a poem that comes from my time in Costa Rica, and it's just very slightly bilingual. Ship of Stars. A puzzle of verdura, frog on leaf, no walls around the patio, corrugated metal roof, fish tacos, thunder, lightning. Lluvia explodes, bars of water cascade into walls. I'm inside an aquarium. The metal roof blasts into giant steel pan frenzy. A work of living art, an accidente, a puzzle, a treasure of green, of drench, of frog. The sequel, parasites, agua, not bottled nor boiled, sporadic clenching in my belly, also arte vivo, as well as driving mapless through fields of azucar, the smell of ocean unseen, y también the art of finding the Argo, brillante, long and low, enormous on the horizon. This was the poem that was a finalist in the Princemer Poetry Prize, which a few people here have asked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I seem to also have Ralph Culver twice, so we're not going to let you read twice, Ralph, sorry. Next is Lynn Vitti.
Okay. I thought maybe there were two Ralph Culvers. I'm only kidding. Thank you so much to everybody. This has been so much fun so far. This poem is called In Our Previous Lives, We Owned a Bakery. You made panettone in round paper collars, elderflower celebration cakes, Bakewell tarts. Sometimes when a shipment of sour Seville oranges arrived by rail from faraway Spain, you put up jars of bitter marmalade for New Year's with grapefruit, blood oranges, lemon in the mix. We worked 16-hour days, left the children with our mothers or mothers-in-law. We gave cinnamon rolls and strong coffee to the cops to stay in their good graces, so they'd keep an eye on the shop. We handed over fresh anadama loaves or cupcakes iced in pink buttercream. The bank wouldn't lend to women in those days. We borrowed from your uncles, paid interest. Mornings, the smell of orange rinds and sugar never ceased to intoxicate us. I watched you lift the cheesecloth like a bedsheet, tie its corners to fashion a jelly bag. I worked the overnight poolish, adding flour, water, filling great crockery bowls with dough. Went to work on the cookies while the bread dough began its first rise. By 9, we were ready to flip the front door sign to welcome, we're open. All this I conjure up from your gift yesterday, marmalade labeled Courage 2021. When I open the squat mason jar, these dreams of another life appear, another life with other struggles, other triumphs, perhaps no better, no worse than this life we know.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And next we have Elaine Nadal.
Hi. So thrilled to be here. I'm going to read a poem from my second chapbook called When, and the poem is titled Stay Silent. It has a brief intro. Ay, no digas nada, que se caiga la lengua, no digas nada, se te caerá la lengua, no digas nada. It takes 4 generations to break a curse. Mother told sister she won't have kids because she's bad seed. Poor sister lost 5, 4 miscarriages and 1 stillborn. Stay still spell, bred by her giver, who begat it from her maker, who got it from his creator. Push, push the jinx away. Sister prayed. Mother thought her prayers were no good because they were either too soggy or too stale and missing some grit and bone, and flowers ain't gonna grow. She needs to pray harder. She needs to push more. But she's got a sincere heart, Mama. Push, push the jinx away. Mother says sister's got a dirty heart and she needs to make herself good. Drink these soapy suds, cleanse your tongue, purify your insides. That's gonna make her sick, Mama. Push, push the jinx away. Sister pushed stillborn baby. Baby never cried. Sister often cries. Therapist told her to meditate, and she meditates in her cage for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. She's got the faith of a mustard seed and the hatred of a mountain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Finally, we have Cole Diganji. Did I say that right, Cole?
Yes, that's exactly how you say it. Thank you. There's been a lot of mention of Elizabeth Bishop today. And it's fitting I chose to write this, chose to read this poem.
Can you make yourself louder?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
This poem was written, inspired by a little exercise by Elizabeth. It's called Bishop's Storm.
I think the problem might be with your microphone. Sorry, it's really fuzzy.
Yes, I agree.
Does that sound better?
No.
You might just want to try the computer microphone instead of the headphones.
How's that?
Oh, terrific.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So this is called Bishop's Storm. Blink, breathe, forgive yourself how easily. It wipes away attention and many guest grins. This storm and their traveling will. It is raining there, not in your party, dedicated to a worthy friend. In the yard, the garden, and the street the same, where the rains fall ends. Think how they must feel now, the least displeased. Crying couples around them, they are not willing to accept such responsibility before dinner. When they had arrived, there was not a cloud, but now instead, the walk returning home that night they dread. Walls expected shadows as fish thought of water. Who shoulders the burden of not one silhouette, but 2, and wakes up the next day sore, to say perspective is not a wall, but a pinhole. Now the weather turns and gutters fixed to a drip. Another valley is lit by the traveling sky, while this one becomes still. Think of an open window to a parlor dim, a carpet dry, the table cleared, and not a dripping sill. A leaf from some young maple tree, the only thing blown in. Thank you.
Thank you. Great open mic, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you for all of the open mic readers and for our featured poets, Tom, Dorothy, and Moira. Beautiful, beautiful reading. And thanks to all of the audience members for being here today. If you are not yet a member of the New England Poetry Club, we invite you to become one, and information on how to join is on our website, nepoetryclub.org. Our next reading in this series will be February 13th. So hope to see many of you again. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay.